They wrapped my tiny body in tight clothing and tied my legs together so that I could not move an inch in any direction. Would they ever release me from this awful situation? I wondered. A little later they did, but for a short while. But in the meantime, my mother was instructed to continue with this practice. At that time I could not understand the verbal expressions used, as they were unfamiliar to me. I was yet to learn about them, but for now I was only able to comprehend the meaning of emotions in a limited fashion. This fascinated me a lot, for whatever was expressed as speech and its tonal quality was enough to understand their meaning. I was content. On the other hand, often being tied, as I was to experience for a while yet, did not look promising. It was ugly. Later I learned that it was for my well-being, as they did not want me to grow either crooked or have bowed legs. They almost always laid me on my back, and I gasped for air. I desperately wanted them to know how uncomfortable I felt, but could not move any limb or finger. It felt as if I was imprisoned completely against my will. Then I decided to imitate my mother's speech, her lullabies and smiles. During this period I do not remember any closeness from my father. He was so distant, and only rarely was I able to see his face, and then only when he was agitated. Was he not excited about having a child, or did he at all like me being there? It was never clear to me. Nevertheless, I was to learn much about him soon enough. Interestingly, whenever I wanted to express myself, I could not, and it was very frustrating. Just imagine, for instance, that you would love to sit up for a change, and could not. In my case, being tightly wrapped in clothes, my movements completely restricted, I did not even know if my body would be able to sit comfortably. For now, the only thing remaining for me was to observe a small darkly lit corner in a large room. I was so restricted that what I was looking at were a couple of walls and a ceiling without knowing what to call them, let alone identify them. I was placed in a hammock, attached by thick strings to the walls, swinging. Ah, yes, there was another string on one side of my bedding, which my mother was holding. Sometimes she attached it to her big toe. She would rock me from time to time while singing a lullaby to relax me and help me sleep. Her love and closeness were evident. I loved her a lot, yet my only reaction and natural responses were through my smiles, my giggles, and my contentment. She was also very careful about what she ate and drank. My well-being was surely above everything else. However, she was a heavy smoker, and it not only stung my eyes, but also choked me. Again, I could do naught else but endure it. And when she bathed me in a large tin basin filled with warm water on top of the kitchen bench, the soap she used badly irritated my eyes. Her cigarette was always held on one side of her mouth when she was doing things, or even resting, and her breath smelt like tobacco. She would push my head forward to wash and dry my curly red-brown hair, and during that time I had great difficulty breathing. Next to my rockabye bed was a horrible piece of equipment placed on a shelf attached to one of the walls. Much later, I was to learn what it was called. Like many other things, I had to become familiar with. It was a radio set made of a plastic material with a glass strip on the top, and was illuminated with yellow and green lines, dots and numbers. Although I did not know what they were called, or what they were for, I was fascinated by them. My mother and father did certain things with that radio thing, like changing the sounds, or channels with its knobs. While they changed those stations, certain sounds or noises were present. They sounded so familiar to me, and I loved to hear them. But there were also different sounds, some of which they called music, and others speech. I got extremely bored with them, and frustrated without knowing what they were. Something had to be done, but I could not tell anybody, not even my mother, how troubled I was by those inharmonious sounds, unlike the sewing machine she regularly used when creating ladies' fashion. All my expressions were interpreted as if I was enjoying them. I was yet to learn that they were radio programs streaming from Paris, Moscow, and Cairo. Occasionally they were listening to Ankara. I could not wait until the next swing, when at one stage my arms were free. Several times I tried to grab the black cord with my right hand, finally succeeding. This time I did not let go, while my hammock swung back the other way, and with that the ugly box making those sounds came flying down. Oh, what bliss it was! It was divine as silence fell, until, of course, my mother discovered what had happened. At this stage I found that I could control the speed at which the hammock moved, as sometimes it was too fast, needing to bring it almost to a standstill. Now I could observe things, without my attention being diverted, and have some peace. I believe that my mother hid what had happened from my father. When I was able to mention these instances to my mother, when I was little over 2 years old, she was either shocked or could not believe how I knew. Perhaps she was surprised at what I remembered and did not know how to react. However, even at that early age, I was completely petrified whenever I heard my father's voice. It was awful, full of resent, full of disagreements, full of anger. Whenever I saw his face, I thought of imminent danger, without knowing the words for it. It felt as if he could end my mother's and my life then and there. Later, I discovered that my mother's pregnancy was unwelcomed by him. I felt that he wanted to get rid of me, yet it was not to be. I was her firstborn and her world. I could only think of my father as being an unfortunate man, probably with an unfortunate past. I knew by the tone of his voice that he was not in a good mood. He could only shout at her, using some choice, ungainly words. I remember how sad she was, crying all the time. She was clearly very unhappy. This might also be why she smoked heavily, apparently after being introduced to such a horrible habit by him. He treated her very harshly, even occasionally hitting her. It worried me a lot, and I thought that this was the way life happened here on earth, as if it was something normal. At the time, not knowing any words, I could only have my own way of understanding things. I had to wait until my language skills developed, thereby helping me think clearly and more easily form the words in thought. I can never forget how, when I was in my mother's arms, she held me tight to protect me. I could sense how frightened she was. I could even feel her rapid heartbeat when he angrily shouted at her and swung his huge hands. His sausage-like fingers hit her in the face, and at the same time hit me so badly that my head was forcibly turned to the other side. It was so painful that the impression it has left in my mental makeup is an ugly one. He was a tyrant. From then on, I always wanted him to be gone. Obviously, his was an unwanted parenthood, perhaps wanting me to fall and die. That was my only impression of him. I was sad and frightened for my mother's and my own safety, feeling so completely helpless and lonely without knowing how to name these circumstances. Again, I could not express myself nor even make a sound. I was petrified. Much later I was to learn that they were first cousins. So, were they forced into marriage due to their social status, or was it due to some other circumstance I was never meant to discover? However, if I had a pair of wings, I would have flown away from the ugliness which I had to endure. I was yet to find out about my parents' real backgrounds. I remember only a few words from a long time ago, when I was able to understand a language that they were forced to speak, living in a foreign country under duress. They had lost everything they previously owned. Is this not a familiar story we hear about from all over the world? Man still continues with his tribal attitudes. In fact, the whole of human history seems to have started in this fashion. No wonder, since the earliest known human civilization had begun in small units, growing into townships, territories, into larger cities and nations, they all pursued supremacy over others, fighting to have what others had. Herd mentality was born, and has remained this way throughout history. Even the stories I was told about my family background reflected this. All my ancestors' farms and homes were devastated, their friends and relatives killed in the ugliest conditions, and they had to wander away from their homes in a bitterly cold winter season, carrying whatever they could on a donkey's back. My mother fell into the snow when she was only a toddler, and her mother, noticing much later, went back all the way in the freezing cold and snowstorm to find her happily giggling child. I am so glad that she did, for otherwise I would not be here or be what I am today. Some other members of the family had already migrated to places like France, where they were offered sanctuary, a place of residence, education, and citizenship. The rest of them eventually followed. For some reason, my father preferred to remain closer to what he considered to be his rightful home, hoping that one day he would have the chance to reclaim what had formerly belonged to his family, hopeful to have some wealthy permanency. The place he chose to live was not where he was born. He was offered other opportunities in Europe, but his dream always remained that he was to become very wealthy, as once before, closer to his ancestors' home. That was apparently his illusional destiny. My mother had a certain affinity with my uncle, who was ill. It seemed he had experienced terrible things in his younger days. He was a professional photographer and lived with his mother until he died as a bachelor, suffering stomach cancer and other medical concerns after being hit by a car. He was only 58. He used to visit us from time to time just to talk to my mother or bring chocolate blocks hidden inside one of his jacket pockets, which we children were encouraged to search for. This started my love for chocolate. My parents' relatives once had extensive properties somewhere in eastern Anatolia until the land was taken over by Turkey, when they were said to have been slaughtered for allegedly belonging to infidel Christians or pagan Jews. Many mass graves can still be found, although some biased scholars claim that it never happened. However, it has all been proved to be true. Much later, I was also shown such an awful place during my visits. They were known as the mass graves of Armenian dogs. During 1915 and after, they migrated to all parts of the world, and a part of their homeland became a permanent state of the Russian Empire. I believe my father was so convinced that because the land was once theirs, it could be recovered, and in the process he would benefit from his endeavors. It was an impossible dream. However, this seemed to be the vision which a few others belonging to his family background also adhered to.